Imagine handing over a huge slice of your salary every month, watching it disappear into taxes and contributions, only to discover that when you urgently need a medical appointment, the waiting list stretches on for months. Or that the road outside your home is full of potholes, the bureaucracy is a nightmare, and justice moves at a snail's pace. In this video, we'll look at 9 European countries, plus one more, where citizens pay high taxes but see little in return when it comes to the quality of public services. Some of these nations are already poor, while others have a more solid welfare system. Yet they all share one thing. In exchange for high taxes, they offer public services so inadequate, inefficient, or in decline that many feel like they're victims of a legalized robbery. To be clear, these aren't necessarily the countries with the highest taxes or the worst services. So let us know in the comments which countries you would add to the list. Welcome to this new video from Amazing Europe. Number 1. Portugal. Did you know that in Portugal, despite a tax burden that can exceed 50% of income for higher earners, as of early 2024, a staggering 1.7 million citizens didn't have an assigned family doctor? This turns a basic appointment into a near impossible task, forcing many to overwhelm emergency rooms. This is the harsh reality of a country where a massive tax load clashes with often dramatically inadequate public services. Portuguese citizens face a financial drain. The tax pressure is suffocating. Income tax ranges from 13% to 48% for the highest earners, and an additional solidarity tax can push the effective rate beyond 50%. VAT stands at 23%, one of the highest in Europe, bringing the overall tax burden to 36.1% of GDP, an enormous weight. And in return, the public healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, plagued by severe staff shortages due in part to unreplaced retirements and the migration of professionals to the private sector or abroad. Waiting times for specialist appointments commonly exceed 6 months, while some hospitals have been forced to temporarily shut down emergency departments, including pediatric ones. Education suffers from a lack of resources. Bureaucracy is an inefficient maze, and the justice system moves painfully slowly. Even the modern road infrastructure comes at a high cost, with some of the highest tolls in Europe, especially burdensome given families' limited purchasing power. The widespread feeling is one of a legalized theft. Record-level taxes in exchange for deeply disappointing services, fueling frustration and the exodus of the country's best talents. Number 2. Hungary. Hungary presents a rather paradoxical situation. This country appears to have an appealing tax system, with a flat income tax rate of 15% and a highly competitive corporate tax of just 9%, which has attracted thousands of foreign companies from Italy, Germany, and the United States. However, this attractive facade hides a much heavier burden. Mandatory social contributions among the highest in Europe, combined with a 27% VAT, one of the highest in the world, turn the overall tax load into one of the heaviest on the continent. But in return for this steep price, what do Hungarians actually get? The healthcare system, in theory universal, is in a critical state, struggling with outdated infrastructure and a continuous outflow of medical professionals seeking better opportunities abroad. With only 6.7% of GDP allocated to healthcare, compared to an EU average of 10.36%, the consequences are severe. Endless waiting lists and the persistence of halepens. The informal tipping of doctors to receive better treatment. Despite government efforts to eliminate it, this practice continues to undermine trust in the system. The education sector doesn't offer a brighter picture. Hungarian teachers are among the lowest paid in the OECD and frequently protest, while PISA test results point to alarming shortcomings in the quality of learning. Bureaucracy, although there have been some attempts at digitalization, is still widely seen as inefficient and susceptible to favoritism and cronyism. Government pro-natalist policies aimed at countering demographic decline have not been enough to stop the exodus of qualified young people, who are driven to emigrate by low salaries and limited professional opportunities across many sectors. While Hungary is trying to implement many reforms, the general feeling among the population is that they are paying an extremely high price for public services that are still far from adequate. despite bearing some of the highest mandatory social contributions in Europe. Number 3. Croatia. Croatia is a true paradise for tourists. But behind this postcard-perfect image lies a far more complex reality for its residents, who are weighed down by a tax burden that, while not among the highest in Europe, in absolute terms, feels disproportionate to the quality of the services they receive and the everyday challenges they face. First and foremost, a devastating housing crisis driven by the very tourism that is supposed to be a blessing. Croatia's tax wedge stands at 38.7%, and although it doesn't reach the peaks seen in some Western European nations, it significantly exceeds the OECD average. This means a substantial portion of labour costs ends up in state coffers through taxes and, more importantly, heavy social contributions, shrinking workers' take-home pay. On top of that, there's a VAT of 25%, one of the highest in Europe. This already burdensome tax load becomes even more frustrating when compared to a public service system that struggles to keep up. The healthcare system is plagued by endless waiting lists and chronic hospital debt. The justice system is slow and cumbersome, with trials commonly dragging on for over 10 years. Public administration is often seen as inefficient and bloated with political favouritism, symbolised by the word uhljeb, used to describe public sector workers hired through connections rather than merit. But the real thorn in the side is the housing crisis, one of the worst in Europe, closely linked to the tourism boom. Many properties are now used for short-term rentals, and housing prices have skyrocketed, rising by 62% in the past 5 years. For young Croatian couples, finding affordable housing has become a nightmare, especially considering the average net salary is just €1,400. Citizens have long demanded answers from successive governments, but for now, the gap between the Croatia seen by tourists and the Croatia lived by residents shows no sign of closing. Number 4. Moldova. Moldova faces a double paradox that deeply affects its citizens. The first paradox is that, although taxes aren't particularly high, at least when compared to the rest of the continent, the public services provided are extremely poor, or more precisely, income taxes are not high, but that doesn't mean the overall tax burden is light, especially when measured against Moldovan salaries. In fact, despite a relatively low flat income tax rate of 12%, the tax system becomes oppressive through social contributions that can reach 18% for employees, with an equivalent share paid by employers, and a VAT of 20%. Eroding wages that are already among the lowest in Europe, and all this in exchange for services that fall far short of expectations. Many say the root of the problem is corruption. A staggering 22% of public service users admit to having paid bribes in the past year, while only 20% of Moldovans still trust their political class. The healthcare system, formerly universal, is crumbling, with the plickhole, a bribe in an envelope, often required to access care. In the past 5 years, over 140 investigations have targeted healthcare workers, with bribes ranging from a few dozen to thousands of euros. Even the country's only National Oncology Institute has been engulfed in scandal. Education is in disarray, marked by rundown facilities and underpaid teachers. Infrastructure is crumbling, and access to safe drinking water remains a distant dream for many, fueling a massive exodus of young people seeking a better life elsewhere. The second paradox lies in Transnistria, the pro-Russian separatist region that lacks international recognition. Here, social contributions fall mainly on employers, and generous Russian energy subsidies create the illusion of low-cost services. However, this apparent benefit comes at a steep price: extremely poor healthcare quality, minimal pensions entirely dependent on Moscow, ideologically controlled education, and an authoritarian regime where freedoms and rights are tightly restricted. Two sides of the same coin. In Moldova, people pay for services swallowed up by corruption. In Transnistria, the illusion of welfare is bought at the cost of submitting to an isolated enclave with no real future. Number 5. Greece. After years of brutal austerity imposed during the debt crisis that rocked Europe, Greeks today are burdened with one of the heaviest tax loads on the continent. Income tax rates rise steeply. VAT stands at a staggering 24%, among the highest in Europe, and hefty social contributions to the EFKA, for pensions and healthcare, combined with the widely hated NFIA, a property tax, complete a suffocating fiscal picture in a country where home ownership is the norm. This massive tax burden, the price of balancing public finances, does not translate into adequate services. The public healthcare system, theoretically universal, is in reality worn out from repeated cuts, endless waiting lists, understaffed facilities, many doctors and nurses have emigrated, and outdated infrastructure. Those who can afford it are often forced to turn to the private sector, where costs can be double or more. The practice of farkelarki, bribing to receive attention and care that should be guaranteed, still persists, widening social inequalities. The situation is further exacerbated by widespread tax evasion, which drains billions from state coffers and fuels a vicious cycle. Increasingly higher taxes for those who pay honestly and insufficient resources to improve public services. Greece also suffers from a stark contrast in infrastructure. On one hand, there are major projects inherited from the 2004 Athens Olympics, modern metro lines, an efficient airport, cutting-edge highways. On the other, as soon as you move away from the urban hubs, you're met with crumbling secondary roads, inadequate local transport, and poor maintenance of basic services. Rounding out the picture is a notoriously outdated bureaucracy, where obtaining a permit or handling paperwork can turn into an odyssey of stamps, signatures, and red tape, leading to frustration and hidden costs. For the average Greek citizen, the balance is bitterly clear. Extremely high taxes in exchange for public services that systematically fail to meet expectations. Number 6. Serbia. Serbia stands as a striking example of imbalance between tax burden and the quality of public services. Serbian citizens face a considerable fiscal load: a 10% income tax, 20% VAT, and, most notably, crippling social contributions expected to reach 35.05% by December 2025, split between employees 19.90% and employers 15.15%. Businesses also pay a 15% corporate profit tax. At first glance, these numbers may not seem alarming, especially compared to Western European countries. But when weighed against low average wages and disappointing public services, the picture darkens significantly. Healthcare, in theory free, is plagued by dysfunction, endless waiting lists, substandard care, and, in many cases, the need for informal incentives to receive timely or adequate treatment. As a result, many citizens are forced into the private healthcare system, effectively paying a high price for their basic health needs. The pervasive control of political parties over public and economic life infects the entire state apparatus. Loyalty often trumps competence, leading to waste, inefficiency, and widespread opacity. Unsurprisingly, Serbia's Corruption Perceptions Index plummeted to 35 out of 100 in 2024, the lowest score since 2012. Despite promises of modernization, the bureaucracy remains Kafkaesque. Tangled procedures, endless delays, and frustrating interfaces that often only miraculously speed up with a gentle bribe. A striking contradiction emerges between flashy new infrastructure, motorways and railways, often funded through large foreign loans, and the everyday reality of neglected services, pothole-ridden local roads, crumbling schools, inadequate healthcare facilities, and poor waste management. The social contract between the Serbian state and its citizens appears fundamentally broken, fueling a growing sense of injustice and mistrust in the institutions that are supposed to serve them. Number 7. Italy. Italy stands as a living contradiction, a country that celebrates beauty, culture, and tradition, yet harbours a deep-seated hatred for taxes. It leads Europe in tax evasion, with over €190 billion unpaid in 2019 alone, accounting for a quarter of all VAT evasion in the EU. For those who do pay their dues, the burden is crushing. Income tax ranges from 23% to 43%, but the real sting lies in the tax and social contribution wedge, which, according to a leading Italian financial newspaper, reaches an astonishing 60% in the private sector. This immense pressure, combined with stagnant wages, has forced many young Italians to remain with their families well into their 30s, while an estimated €300 billion in private wealth has quietly moved abroad. But what does the average taxpayer receive in return for this enormous fiscal burden? Public services widely seen as inadequate. Healthcare, though home to centres of excellence, is marred by endless waiting lists, forcing many to turn to private clinics, and by a deep north-south divide in quality. Bureaucracy suffocates both businesses and citizens with slow, complex procedures, while the justice system limps along with trials that can stretch beyond a decade, undermining the very concept of legal certainty. Perceived corruption further tarnishes the system, placing Italy among the lowest-ranked Western European nations in terms of institutional trust. Many Italians believe their taxes fund waste and malpractice more than they fund effective public services. Frustration peaks when looking at the privileges of the political class. Italian MPs earn around €10,500 gross per month, more than 4 times the national average salary. Once allowances, per diems, and reimbursements are added, their net income exceeds €11,000, not to mention perks like free travel across the country. This yawning gap between the sacrifices demanded of ordinary citizens and the privileges enjoyed by their representatives makes the tax burden feel not just heavy, but morally intolerable, reinforcing the belief that taxes are fueling a self-serving system, rather than promoting the common good. Number 8. Romania. Romania presents a striking fiscal paradox. Despite a seemingly attractive flat income tax, the true weight on citizens' shoulders is felt through crushing social contributions that dramatically erode take-home pay. But the real crisis becomes evident when we examine what Romanians actually get in return for their taxes. The public healthcare system resembles a Dantean nightmare, where the word free becomes a cruel joke. Despite regular contributions, patients, especially outside the capital, face poorly equipped hospitals and a mass exodus of medical professionals. The worst part? The omnipresent bribes have become almost institutionalised, turning healthcare from a basic right into a privilege for the few. It's no surprise that Romania's healthcare is widely regarded as the most corrupt in the EU, and this map shows where corruption is most rampant. Road infrastructure is another national sore spot. Romania holds the record for the fewest kilometres of highways in the EU. Despite grand announcements, projects drag on for decades, bogged down by suffocating bureaucracy, shady contracts, and administrative incompetence. Education reveals an equally bleak picture, with alarming school dropout rates placing Romania second in the EU for young people aged 15 to 19 who are neither studying nor working, thereby cementing social inequalities rather than breaking them down. Bureaucracy completes this Kafkaesque landscape. Even basic rights often feel out of reach without the infamous pile, the right connections. This fuels a sense of helplessness and alienation, as if the state were distant or even hostile to its own citizens. Perhaps the most tragic irony is seen in the European funds. Billions of euros with the potential to transform the country. But due to inept administration and widespread corruption, these funds are absorbed painfully slowly, diverted for private gain, or simply wasted. Meanwhile, ordinary Romanians are left watching public services crawl along, improving, if at all, at a snail's pace. Number 9. Belarus. Belarus stands out as a peculiar case in the European landscape, a nation cloaked in media silence, where the illusion of stability masks an oppressive tax system and faltering public services, hidden beneath layers of state propaganda. At first glance, tax rates might seem moderate, a flat income tax of 13% and a corporate tax of 20%. Higher than many Eastern European countries, but still lower than in the West. Yet the real burden lies in social contributions. Employers are saddled with a staggering 34% of gross salaries to fund pensions, healthcare, and insurance. This means Belarus has one of the highest total tax burdens in Eastern Europe, especially on businesses, effectively strangling their ability to increase net wages, even though these costs don't appear as direct deductions on employees' paychecks. So what does the average Belarusian receive in return? A severely underfunded healthcare system with outdated equipment, especially in rural areas, and a constant drain of medical professionals fleeing the country. Education is tightly centralized, suffering from low teacher pay and a dire need for modernization. The bureaucracy is marked by low transparency and tight political control, leading to inefficiency and arbitrary decisions. The judiciary lacks true independence, acting more as a tool of the state than a guardian of citizens' rights. Corruption is notoriously difficult to quantify due to limited press freedom, but Belarus ranks 114th in the 2024 Corruption Perception Index, behind Moldova, Croatia, Portugal, and even Hungary. Since the post-2020 crackdown and the government's support for Russia in the war in Ukraine, the country has become increasingly isolated, with international sanctions deepening the economic crisis. This has triggered a vicious cycle. The state's desperate need for revenue clashes with a shrinking economic base, worsening the gap between taxes and services. The result? A massive brain drain, driven not only by economic hardship, but also by the absence of freedom and opportunity. Before we reveal the 10th and final country in this ranking, if you found this video informative, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and hitting the bell icon so you don't miss our next uploads. And don't forget to check out our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we rank US states, Canadian provinces, and European countries across a wide range of fascinating topics. Number 10. France. At the beginning of this video, we told you we would show you 9 countries plus 1, and here it is. Unlike the others on this list, France offers considerably better public services, but we decided to include it for 2 important reasons. The first reason is that it has the highest tax burden in Europe, at least in terms of the tax to GDP ratio. In fact, we are talking about a tax to GDP ratio of 43.8%. Furthermore, it has a particularly burdensome tax wedge on labour. This enormous fiscal pressure funds one of the most advanced welfare systems in the world. In 2022, public social spending reached around 32% of GDP, an absolutely extraordinary figure. Historically, this has translated into high-quality public services, a strong healthcare system, free and solid education, and modern, efficient infrastructure. However, and this is the second reason for France's inclusion, there is a growing wave of dissatisfaction. More and more people believe that the quality and accessibility of public services are declining. A recent survey paints a divided nation. 49% of citizens say they are satisfied, while 51% are not. While public employees receive good ratings, 71% appreciate their courtesy, 65% their professionalism, operational issues are hard to ignore. Only 43% are satisfied with how deadlines are respected in public administration. Public trust in how taxes are used is critically low. Only 32% of French citizens believe their taxes are well spent. Hospitals inspire just 29% confidence in how funds are managed. Public housing and job agencies sit at a mere 32%. Meanwhile, recent reforms, especially the controversial pension reform, raising the retirement age to 64 and scrapping special regimes for transport and energy workers, were seen as direct attacks on hard-won social rights, sparking widespread strikes and fierce resistance. France, therefore, represents a paradox, one of the highest tax burdens in the world, matched with a historically excellent but now faltering welfare model, and a population that is increasingly uneasy, watching the very system their taxes should protect begin to deteriorate. And now, we really want to know your opinion. What do you think are the most common problems among the countries we've shown? Those that lead to poor public services despite high taxes? Knowing that these 10 countries aren't necessarily the ones with the absolute highest taxes or worse services, which others would you add to the list? To get a fuller picture, check out our video on the 10 European countries with the highest taxes. You'll find some surprising names that might just blow your mind. That's all for this video. See you next time.